At family dinner, my parents logged into my account to drain my trust fund. I just smiled and sipped my wine because they did not know I had linked that transfer to a silent federal alarm. Game over. My name is Sophia, and at 34 years old, I am a forensic accountant who hunts down international money launderers for a living. But to my family, I am just the ATM. The invisible bank account they tap whenever my brother Trey makes a bad bet. As the FBI agents marched my father David and my mother Martha out of the five-star restaurant in handcuffs, the entire room fell silent. My sister-in-law Courtney was screaming mascara running down her face, claiming she was a victim. I simply raised my glass of Cabernet to them. They thought I was the prey. They did not know I was the hunter. Before I tell you how I set the trap that took down my own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save yourself. This nightmare began 3 hours earlier at the entrance of Le Bernardin, one of the most exclusive steakhouses in DC. I arrived 5 minutes early wearing a bespoke black wool coat I had commissioned from a designer in Milan. It was understated elegant and worth more than my brother's car. But as I reached for the door handle, a manicured hand shot out and blocked my path. It was Courtney, my brother Trey's wife. She looked me up and down with that familiar sneer she reserved only for me. "Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You are not seriously planning to walk in through the main entrance wearing that thing, are you? It looks like something you picked up from a thrift store bin. We have investors meeting us inside. You know, high net worth individuals. We cannot have you looking like the help." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face completely smooth. Courtney had been doing this for 5 years. Little jabs at my appearance, my dark skin, my quiet nature. She needed everyone to know that she, a white woman from a wealthy family, was the prize Trey had won, while I was just the leftover baggage. "Courtney," I said calmly, "this coat is fine. Move your hand." She didn't move. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Listen to me, Sophia. Trey is closing a massive deal tonight. This dinner is about him. It is about the Jenkins family legacy. Do not embarrass us. Maybe you should take off the coat before you come in, or better yet, use the side entrance near the kitchen. It would be more appropriate for you." I looked at her hand on the brass handle, then looked her dead in the eye. "I am walking through this door, Courtney, and if you do not move, I will make a scene that will definitely embarrass your investors." "Do you want to test me?" she huffed, rolling her eyes like a petulant teenager, and finally stepped aside. "You are so dramatic, Sophia. I was just trying to help you not look like a charity case." We walked inside, the heavy scent of truffle oil and expensive cologne hitting us. The host led us to a prime table in the center of the room under a glittering chandelier. My parents David and Martha were already seated flanking Trey like he was a king holding court. Trey was wearing a suit that was too tight, talking loudly into his phone, clearly performing for the room. "Ah, the girls are here, my father." David boomed, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a preacher. He stood up and hugged Courtney warmly, kissing her on the cheek. "Come sit next to Trey, darling. We need the power couple front and center." I waited for my greeting. My mother Martha barely glanced up from her menu. "You are late, Sophia." "I was on time, mother," I said, reaching for the chair opposite my father. "No, no, no," Courtney interrupted, snapping her fingers at a waiter. "Not there. Trey needs that background for his live stream later. The lighting is better." "Sophia, you sit down there." She pointed to a chair at the very end of the table, half obscured by a decorative pillar and dangerously close to the server station. It was the kids' table spot, the spot for the unwanted guest. I looked at my parents. My father was busy pouring wine for Trey. My mother was fixing Trey's tie. Neither of them looked at me. It was a perfect metaphor for my entire life. I sat down in the shadowed seat, placing my clutch on the table. "So," Trey said, finally acknowledging my existence. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about my recent promotion to senior partner, a position that came with a salary double what he pretended to make. He just grinned. Glad you made it, sis. Tonight is going to be huge. I am launching the Alpha Real Estate Fund. We are talking millions. That is my boy. My mother beamed, clapping her hands. A visionary, just like your father. The Lord has truly blessed your business acumen. I took a sip of water to wash down the bitterness. Trey had not sold a single property in 2 years. His business acumen consisted of maxing out credit cards and begging daddy for bailouts. I knew for a fact he was $40,000 in debt to a bookie in Baltimore because I had seen the collection notices he tried to hide at Mom's house. Mom, I said quietly, Trey is currently unemployed. Maybe we should focus on paying off his existing debts before launching a fund. The table went ice cold. My mother slammed her fork down. Sophia, she hissed. Why must you always be so negative? Why can you not just support your brother? This is why you are still single at 34. No man wants a woman who counts pennies and judges everyone. Trey is an entrepreneur. It takes capital to make capital. Courtney laughed a sharp tinkling sound. Oh, Martha, do not worry. Sophia just doesn't understand high finance. She is a worker bee. She punches a clock. Trey is a king. He builds empires. It is just a different mindset. I gripped the stem of my wine glass. I wanted to scream that I was the one who paid off the mortgage on the church last month. I wanted to scream that I was the one who paid for hip surgery for Dad. But I stayed silent. I had to wait. The trap was set, but they hadn't walked into it yet. My father tapped his spoon against his crystal glass, calling for attention. The waiter poured a vintage champagne that cost $300 a bottle. Family. My father started, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and greed. We are gathered here to celebrate 40 years of marriage, yes. But more importantly, we are here to secure the future. The Jenkins legacy. He paused, his eyes sliding over Trey, then Courtney, and finally landing on me at the end of the table. His smile did not reach his eyes. Sophia, he said, his voice dropping an octave. We need to talk about your contribution. Trey's investors need to see liquidity. They need to see family backing. We have discussed it, and we have decided that it is time for you to step up. I felt the air leave the room. Here it comes. What do you mean, step up? I asked, keeping my voice steady. My mother leaned forward, her face hard. We mean the trust fund, Sophia. The money your grandmother left. It is sitting there doing nothing. We need it. Tonight. The silence that followed my mother's demand was so thick it felt like it was choking me. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, and the low hum of conversation seemed to fade into the background. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears and the arrogant drumming of my brother Trey's fingers on the white tablecloth. $200,000. They were not asking for a loan to fix a leaky roof or cover a medical emergency. They were demanding a fortune, my fortune, as if they were ordering another round of appetizers. My father David cleared his throat, sensing my hesitation. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach, in that paternal, authoritative pose he used from the pulpit every Sunday. He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile that said he expected obedience. Now, Sophia, he began, his voice smooth like oil. We are not asking for a handout. This is an investment. Trey's firm, Trey Ventures, is on the cusp of acquiring a prime commercial lot downtown. But the bank requires a show of good faith liquidity. We need $200,000 by tomorrow morning to secure the contract. We know you have it. Grandmother's trust fund has been sitting in that account since you turned 25. It is time that money worked for the family. Don't you think? I looked at Trey. He was avoiding my gaze, staring intently at his champagne glass, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the cool air conditioning. I knew exactly what that sweat meant. I am a forensic accountant. I investigate financial lies for a living. I can smell desperation from a mile away. There is no commercial lot, is there, Trey? I asked, my voice calm but cutting. Trey's head snapped up. Of course there is. You do not know what you are talking about. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. I think I do. I think this $200,000 has nothing to do with real estate, and everything to do with that trip you took to Atlantic City last weekend. I think if I checked the public records, I would not find any purchase agreements for Trey Ventures, but I might find some very interesting lien filings against your car. The table erupted. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls as if I had just slapped her. Trey turned a shade of red that clashed with his tie. How dare you, my mother hissed. She reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by a lifetime of self-righteousness. How dare you accuse your brother of such things? Trey is a man of God. He has made mistakes, yes, but he is trying to build a future. She tightened her grip, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. This is the devil talking in you, Sophia, the devil of greed. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. Have we not raised you better than this? We gave you everything. We put clothes on your back. We put food in your stomach. I labored for 20 hours to bring you into this world. And now when your family needs you, when your brother needs a lifeline, you sit there and judge him. You cling to your money like a miser, while your own flesh and blood suffers. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was weaving scripture with guilt, trying to make my financial boundaries look like a moral failing. For years, this tactic had worked. For years, I had written checks just to make the guilt stop, to buy a moment of peace. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was not the scared little girl seeking their approval. I gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off my wrist. Mom, I said, keeping my voice low so the neighboring tables would not hear, though part of me wanted them to. You did not give me everything. I paid for my own college tuition while you bought Trey a brand new Mustang. I paid for my own apartment while you let Trey live rent-free in the guest house. I have never asked you for a dime. And I am not judging him. I am simply stating facts. I will not fund his gambling addiction. Then Courtney chimed in, and her voice was like nails on a chalkboard. She laughed, a high-pitched, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. She swirled her wine, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Oh, Sophia, honestly, you are being so dramatic. Gambling addiction. Please, Trey likes to have fun. Successful men take risks. That is what separates him from people like you. She gestured at me with her fork, pointing at my plain black blouse. Look at you. You are an accountant, Sophia. You sit in a cubicle all day looking at spreadsheets. You earn a little salary. You save your pennies. You buy your little sensible shoes. You do not understand how big business works. You do not understand vision. Trey is going to be a millionaire. He is going to change the world. What are you doing? Hoarding cash in a savings account. What is the point of having money if you are just going to be you? The insult was breathtaking in its hypocrisy. In one breath, she was mocking my career and my lifestyle, calling me boring and small. In the next breath, she was demanding the fruits of that very labor. She despised me for being a worker, yet she felt entitled to my wages. I looked at Courtney, taking in her designer dress that I knew was bought on credit, her expertly highlighted hair, her manicured nails that had never done a day of hard work. Courtney, I said, a small cold smile playing on my lips. If Trey is such a visionary, and if you are so confident in his success, why don't you ask your father for the money? Why are you begging the boring accountant for a handout? Courtney's face hardened. My family's money is tied up in trusts. You wouldn't understand complex wealth management. Besides, this is a Jenkins family matter. We are giving you a chance to be part of the legacy, to actually matter for once. My father slammed his hand on the table, silencing the bickering. His face was no longer the benevolent patriarch. The mask had slipped, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. The man who had drained my grandmother's accounts before she was even cold in her grave, leaving only the trust fund he couldn't touch legally. Enough, he commanded. We are not here to debate. We are here to solve a problem. Sophia listened to me closely. We are a family. Families share burdens. Trey is in a difficult position. If he does not come up with this capital, there will be consequences. Serious consequences. Do you want to see your brother hurt? Do you want to see him ruined? I looked at Trey. He looked pathetic, slumped in his chair, unable to even meet my eyes. He was 36 years old, yet he was still a child hiding behind his parents. I am sorry, Dad, I said. And for the first time that night, I picked up my wine glass and took a long, deliberate sip. The answer is no. I will not give you $200,000. I will not give you $2,000. If Trey has a debt, he needs to get a job and pay it off like a man. I am done being the safety net. The refusal hung in the air. I expected shouting. I expected my mother to start crying loudly to cause a scene. I expected Trey to throw a tantrum. But instead, a strange, chilling calm settled over my father. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, but in a way that suggested he had anticipated this outcome. He exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Courtney. It was a look of conspiracy, a look that sent a shiver down my spine. "I see," my father said quietly. He picked up his napkin and dabbed his mouth elegantly. "I was afraid you would say that, Sophia. You have always been stubborn. You have always lacked the spirit of generosity that defines this family." He sighed, shaking his head as if he were a teacher dealing with a slow student. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this. I really did. I wanted you to give it freely. I wanted you to prove your loyalty. But since you refuse to do what is right, we have to take matters into our own hands." "What does that mean?" I asked, my grip on the wine glass tightening. My father smiled, and this time it was a predator's smile. "It means, my dear daughter, that I knew you would be selfish. So I prepared a plan B." He nodded at Courtney. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out an iPad. She placed it on the table in front of her, the screen glowing blue in the dim restaurant light. She tapped the screen a few times, her long fingernails clicking against the glass, and then turned it around to face me. My heart stopped. On the screen was the login page for my primary bank account, the account that held the trust fund, the account that held my life savings. And in the username field, my email was already typed in. "You can't be serious," I whispered. Courtney grinned, a wide, predatory expression that showed too many teeth. "Oh, we are very serious, Sophia, and we don't need your permission anymore. We have something better." "You think I am bluffing, do you?" Courtney laughed, shaking her head as she tapped a few more times on the glass screen. The blue light illuminated her face, giving her a ghostly, almost demonic appearance in the dim restaurant. She swiveled the iPad around so I could see it clearly. There it was. My bank portal. The login screen had already been bypassed. My stomach should have dropped. My hands should have been shaking. Any normal person watching their life savings being accessed by a hostile relative would be screaming for the police. But I felt nothing but a cold, clinically detached fascination. I was watching a crime in progress, and I had a front row seat. "How did you do this?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "I have two-factor authentication. I have biometric locks. You cannot just guess my password." Courtney leaned back, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She picked up a breadstick and waved it around like a conductor's baton. "Oh, Sophia, you always underestimate me. You think because I enjoy shopping and fine dining that I am stupid. But you forget that before I married Trey, I spent 5 years in retail banking. I know exactly how the system works, and more importantly, I know exactly where the cracks are." She took a bite of the breadstick, chewing slowly before continuing. "You see, banks are designed to protect against strangers. They are not designed to protect against family, especially family who has all your personal information. I have your social security number from that time you applied for the car loan for Dad. I have your mother's maiden name, obviously, and thanks to a little digital sleight of hand, I have something even better." She reached into her purse and pulled out a notarized document, sliding it across the table toward me. It was a power of attorney. It looked official. It had the seals, it had the stamps, and at the bottom, it had a signature that looked exactly like mine. Digital signatures are so easy to replicate if you have the right software, Courtney purred. We filed this 3 days ago, claiming you were temporarily incapacitated due to a medical emergency. The bank froze your access and granted temporary stewardship to your father. And since Dad is not great with technology, he graciously delegated the access credentials to me. I looked at my father. He was busy cutting his steak, avoiding my eyes, but nodding in agreement with Courtney's explanation. It is for your own good, Sophia, he mumbled. We cannot let your stubbornness stand in the way of the family's blessing. This is stewardship. We are stewarding your resources better than you can. I looked back at the screen. Courtney had navigated to the transfer page. The destination account was already filled in. Trey Ventures LLC. The amount was typed in the box, $1,500,000. The entire balance of the trust. So let me get this straight, I said, my eyes locking on Courtney's. You forged a federal document. You committed identity theft. You impersonated me to a financial institution. And now you are about to commit wire fraud. And you are doing all of this on an unsecured restaurant Wi-Fi network. Courtney rolled her eyes. Stop using those scary legal words. We are not stealing. We are borrowing. We are moving family money to a family business. Once the deal closes next week, we will put it back. You won't even miss it. Stop being such a drama queen. Trey, who had been nervously watching the screen, suddenly found his courage. Yeah, Sophia, quit trying to scare us. You are just jealous that we outsmarted you. You thought you could hoard this money over our heads like some kind of power trip. Well, guess what? The power is back where it belongs, with the head of the family. He reached out and pulled the iPad closer to him. His hands were sweaty. I could see the greed radiating off him like heat waves. He looked at the number on the screen and his eyes widened. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. It was his salvation. It was his ticket to being the big shot he always pretended to be. I picked up my wine glass. The condensation felt cool against my fingertips. I swirled the dark red liquid, watching the legs run down the side of the glass. This was it, the point of no return. I had to give them one last chance, not for their sake but for mine. I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was no redemption left in them. Courtney, I said softly. Trey, Mom, Dad. They all looked at me, annoyed by the interruption. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant. Once you press that button, the money leaves my account. There is no undoing it. You are crossing a line that you can never uncross. If you stop now, if you close that iPad and walk away, I will not call the police. We can go our separate ways. But if you press that button, you are sealing your fate. My mother let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Oh, spare us the melodrama, Sophia. Sealing our fate. You sound like a bad movie villain. We are taking what is rightfully ours. God has provided this ram in the thicket. Trey laughed, too emboldened by our mother's support. You are just bluffing, sis. You are scared because you lost. You have no power here. Watch me. He hovered his index finger over the glowing green button that said transfer funds. He looked at me, a smirk twisting his face. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to jump across the table and try to wrestle the iPad away from him. But I didn't move. I just sat there perfectly still, like a statue carved from obsidian. I watched his finger. Do it, I thought. Do it and set me free. Trey's finger descended. He pressed the glass with force as if he were crushing an insect. The screen buffered for a second. A little spinning wheel appeared. The table held its breath. My father stopped chewing. My mother leaned in. Courtney held her breath, her eyes wide with anticipation. Then the screen changed. A bright green checkmark appeared. Transaction successful. Funds transferred. Wow. $500,000. Ours. Destination, Trey Ventures, LLC. Trey let out a whoop that turned heads 3 tables away. Yes, he shouted, punching the air. Boom! That is how we do it. Courtney clapped her hands giddily, bouncing in her seat. We did it. We actually did it. Oh my God, Trey, we are rich. My father wiped his mouth with his napkin, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Praise the Lord. I knew he would provide. They were high-diving into a pool of relief and euphoria. They were celebrating their victory. They were congratulating themselves on their cleverness. They were already spending the money in their heads. Trey was probably thinking about a new car. Courtney was probably planning a shopping spree in Paris. My parents were probably thinking about how they could brag to the church council about their son's massive donation. I sat there and watched them. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. The taste was complex, tart, and dry. It tasted like justice. They didn't notice that I wasn't crying. They didn't notice that I wasn't panicking. They were too busy staring at the success screen, passing the iPad around like a trophy. You should have listened to me, I said quietly to the empty air. Trey looked up, grinning from ear to ear. What was that loser? I couldn't hear you over the sound of me being a millionaire. I didn't answer. I just glanced at my Apple Watch. The notification had just come through. External transfer detected. Federal trapwire activated. Status alert sent to FBI Cybercrimes Division. I looked up at my brother, and for the first time that night I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Enjoy it, Trey, I said. It is the most expensive meal you will ever have. The atmosphere at the table transformed instantly. The tension that had been thick enough to choke on just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a manic, almost intoxicated energy. It was disgusting to watch. It was like watching vultures who had been circling a dying animal finally land and begin to tear into the flesh. They were not just relieved. They were euphoric. They were drunk on power and the sudden influx of $1.5 million that did not belong to them. Waiter, my father bellowed, waving his arm with the expansive arrogance of a man who believes he owns the world. Bring us your finest bottle of Dom Perignon, the vintage, and bring another round of appetizers. The caviar this time. We have much to celebrate. The waiter, a professional young man, who had likely seen every type of behavior in this establishment, hurried over, sensing the shift in the room's dynamic. He didn't know he was serving criminals. He just saw a family in high spirits. I sat there invisible in my own skin. I was no longer Sophia the daughter or Sophia the sister. I was simply the resource they had mined. Now that the mine was empty, I was irrelevant. I watched Trey high-five my father, a 36-year-old man high-fiving his father because they had successfully robbed his younger sister. I am getting the Porsche, Trey announced, his eyes glazed over with greed. Not the Cayman. The 911 GT3. Matte black. I saw one at the dealership in Arlington last week. I am going to walk in there tomorrow morning and pay cash. Do you know how good that is going to feel? Walking in there and dropping a bag of cash on the desk, Courtney squealed, clutching his arm. Oh, baby, you deserve it. You have worked so hard on this vision. But remember, we need to book that trip to the Maldives. First class. I cannot be seen in coach anymore. Not with our new status. And I need to stop by the Hermes boutique. They have a Birkin bag I have been on the wait list for, but I bet cash cuts the line. My mother, not to be outdone in the spending spree, chimed in. Her voice was pious, but her eyes were calculating. Now, let us not forget the Lord. We need to tithe from this blessing. The church roof does need repairs, but I was thinking we should finally commission that new stained glass window for the sanctuary, the one with the dedication plaque, gifted by the Jenkins family. It will show the congregation that God rewards the faithful. I took another sip of my wine, forcing myself to swallow. The gall was breathtaking. They were planning to put their names on a church window paid for with stolen federal bait money. They were carving up the carcass of my financial life before it was even cold. Trey turned to me, his face flushed with adrenaline. He looked at me with a smirk that was half pity and half contempt. "Don't look so sour, sis," he said, popping a piece of bread into his mouth. "You should be happy. You are an investor now. When Trey Ventures takes off, I might even pay you back with interest." "Maybe. If you learn to have a better attitude." Courtney laughed, tapping her manicured nails on the table. "Oh, stop teasing her, Trey. She is probably worried about how she is going to get home, since you know we drained the account linked to her debit card." She reached into her purse, rummaged around for a moment, and pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. She tossed it onto the table in front of me. It landed near my wine glass, a pathetic green piece of paper meant to symbolize my total defeat. "Here," Courtney said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Take an Uber. Use the rest to buy yourself a comfort meal, maybe some ice cream. Treat yourself. Consider it a lesson in sharing. You really need to learn that family comes first. Maybe this will humble you a bit." I looked at the $50 bill. Then I looked at Courtney. She was glowing. She truly believed she had won. She believed she was the smart one, the alpha, the queen bee who had put the worker drone in her place. She had no idea that she was currently sitting inside a burning building. I checked my watch. 1 minute and 45 seconds had passed since the transfer. The federal banking system is archaic in many ways, but the trapwire system designed by the FBI Cybercrimes Division is state-of-the-art. It does not flag a transaction immediately. That would be too suspicious. It waits. It lets the money land. It lets the recipient feel safe. It waits exactly 3 minutes to verify the IP address, cross-reference the device fingerprint with known criminal databases, and lock down the geolocation of the perpetrators. 3 minutes. That is the window between the crime and the cage, 1 minute and 50 seconds. "So Dad," Trey said, leaning back and loosening his tie. "When do we tell the investors?" "Tomorrow," my father replied, swirling his champagne glass as the waiter poured the bubbling golden liquid. "We let the funds settle overnight. Then we move it to the offshore entity Courtney set up. By the time anyone notices, the money will be washed and clean. 2 minutes." I looked at my mother. She was humming a hymn, tapping her fingers on the table. "Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine." The irony was so sharp, it felt like a physical cut. I decided to speak one last time. I wanted to hear their voices for the recording device I had running in my clutch. "So that is the plan?" I asked softly. "You are going to launder the money through an offshore shell company." Courtney rolled her eyes. "God, Sophia, stop using words like launder. It is called asset protection. And yes, that is the plan. Not that you would understand the nuance of international finance. You are just a bean counter. Stick to your spreadsheets and let the adults handle the wealth." 2 minutes and 30 seconds. "And you do not feel any guilt?" I asked, looking at my father. "You just stole your daughter's life savings, everything I worked for." My father sighed a heavy theatrical sigh. "We did not steal, Sophia. We liberated the capital. You were hoarding it. That is a sin. We are freeing it to do good work, to build a legacy. Someday, when you are less emotional, you will thank us. You will see that we did this for you, to teach you trust." 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The waiter placed the caviar on the table. Trey grabbed a spoon, piling a massive mound onto a cracker. "To the Jenkins dynasty," Trey shouted, raising his glass. "To family," Courtney cheered. "To God's providence," my mother added. They clinked their glasses. Crystal rang out against crystal, a clear bell-like sound that marked the end of their lives as they knew them. 3 minutes. My phone buzzed against my leg. It was a single long vibration. The signal. I didn't need to look at it, but I did anyway. I placed my phone on the table, face up, right next to the $50 bill Courtney had thrown at me. The screen lit up with a text message. It was from a contact saved as Liaison Miller. The message was short. "Fish is on the hook. Alpha team is moving. ETA 30 seconds. I picked up the $50 bill. I folded it neatly, running my thumb over the crease, making it perfectly sharp. "Courtney," I said, my voice cutting through their laughter. She looked at me, annoyed. "What now?" "I think you might want to hold on to this," I said, sliding the $50 bill back toward her. She frowned. Why? Because I said, looking her dead in the eye, the smile finally reaching my face. Lawyers are expensive, and bail bondsmen usually require cash. Before she could respond, before the confusion could fully form on her face, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst open. The sound was not loud, but the sudden silence that swept through the restaurant was deafening. The ambient chatter died instantly. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I watched the reflection in Trey's eyes. I watched his pupils dilate from arrogance to sheer, unadulterated terror. I took a sip of my wine. It was delicious. To understand why I sat there calmly sipping a vintage Cabernet while federal agents swarmed my family. We have to rewind the clock exactly 14 days. The trap I sprang at Le Bernardin was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully calculated operation that began on a humid Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. It was one of those obligatory family barbecues where my mother Martha insisted we all play the part of the happy, successful family. I had left my purse in my father's home office, a room that was strictly off-limits to everyone except the patriarch himself. I went back inside to retrieve my allergy medication, and as I approached the heavy oak door, I heard the distinct click of a smartphone camera shutter. The door was slightly ajar. Through the crack I saw Courtney, my sister-in-law, standing at my father's mahogany desk. She had not just stumbled in there. She was on a mission. My purse was open on the blotter. Courtney had my wallet in her left hand and her iPhone in her right. She was methodically taking high-resolution photographs of my driver license, my social security card, and my platinum credit cards. I watched as she flipped the cards over to capture the security codes on the back. She was humming to herself a happy little tune as she committed a felony against the woman she called sister. Any normal person would have kicked that door open. Any normal person would have screamed and caused a scene right there in the hallway. But I am not a normal person, and I am certainly not the simple tax accountant my family believes me to be. They think I spend my days filing returns for small business owners and stressing over deductibles. They think my job is boring, safe, and modest. That is the cover story I have maintained for a decade to protect them and myself. The truth is vastly different. I am a senior forensic auditor for a private firm that contracts directly with the Department of Justice and the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I do not balance checkbooks. I hunt predators. I trace the flow of dirty money through shell companies, cryptocurrency exchanges, and offshore trusts. I have helped dismantle cartels and expose Ponzi schemes that were far more sophisticated than anything my brother Trey could ever dream of. So when I saw Courtney stealing my identity, I did not see a personal betrayal. I saw a crime in progress, and my training kicked in instantly. I knew that if I confronted her now, she would cry. She would claim she was just looking for gum. She would gaslight me and my parents would take her side. They would say I was being paranoid. I needed undeniable proof, and I needed the crime to be significant enough to bypass the local police who were golfing buddies with my father. I stepped back silently, my heart rate not rising a single beat. I walked back out to the patio and ate my burger, while Courtney came out 5 minutes later, smiling and asking if I wanted lemonade. I smiled back. That was the moment I decided they had to go down. The next morning I walked into my office in downtown DC. It is a sterile, secure facility where we have to leave our personal phones in lockers outside. I walked straight to the office of Assistant Director Miller, my FBI liaison. Miller is a man who has seen everything, but even he was surprised when I laid out the situation. I told him that my brother and his wife were planning to defraud me. I told him about Trey's gambling debts, which I had tracked through the dark web to a syndicate we were already investigating, but then I made him an offer. I told him I wanted to set a trap, a honeypot. In the world of cybersecurity and intelligence, a honeypot is a decoy system designed to lure attackers. It looks like a vulnerable server or a valuable database, but it is actually a cage. I proposed that we create a specific bank account under my name. We would make it look like the long-dormant trust fund from my grandmother. We would fill it with $1.5 million, but it would not be real money. It would be federal bait currency. Digital funds that were tagged, tracked, and monitored by the highest levels of government surveillance. Miller looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He asked me if I was sure. He reminded me that once we initiated a federal sting operation, there was no turning back. If my family took the bait, they would not just be stealing from me. They would be stealing government property across state lines using wire transmission. That triggers the RICO Act. That triggers mandatory minimum sentences. He asked me if I was prepared to send my own brother and parents to federal prison. I thought about the way my mother looked at me when I was a child, always disappointed that I wasn't a boy. I thought about the way my father used my college fund to buy Trey a car. I thought about Courtney snapping photos of my ID while humming a tune. I looked Miller in the eye and told him to set it up. We spent the next week building the legend. I planted physical documents in my apartment where I knew Courtney would snoop when she came over for wine. I left fake bank statements on my coffee table, showing a balance of $1.5 million. I even staged a phone call with a fake banker while she was in the room complaining loudly about how I didn't know what to do with all that liquid cash sitting in my trust. I watched her eyes light up. I saw the greed take root. She texted Trey immediately. I intercepted that text too. It read, "The cow is fat. We can milk her dry." The level of disrespect was staggering, but it only fueled my resolve. I needed them to believe they were the smart ones. I needed them to believe I was the clueless victim. The power of attorney document Courtney forged was the final key. When the bank notified me of the filing, I authorized it. I manually overrode the security flag. I let them have the access. Miller told me it was risky. He said that if they spent the money too quickly before we could freeze the assets, it might be a headache to recover. I told him they wouldn't spend it on small things. They were too greedy. They would try to move the whole lump sum to an offshore account to hide it. That was their pattern. And that would be their grave. So when I sat at that table at Le Bernardin, I wasn't just a sister refusing a loan. I was an operator running a live mission. I gave them every chance to back down. I warned them. I asked them if they were sure. I practically begged them to stop, but their greed was deafening. Their greed. When Trey pressed that transfer button, he didn't just move numbers on a screen. He tripped a silent alarm that rang directly in the field office 3 blocks away. He confirmed his intent to commit grand larceny and wire fraud. He signed his own confession digitally. I remember looking at the confirmation screen on the iPad. Transaction successful. It was the most satisfying text I have ever read. It meant that the trap was closed. It meant that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to pay for their mistakes. I looked at Miller's text message on my phone. The team was in the elevator. I took a breath. I prepared my face to look surprised. But inside I was laughing. They wanted my money so badly. I decided to give them something else instead. I gave them a criminal record. Some people might look at what I did and call it cold. They might ask how a daughter could sit there and watch her parents and brother walk into a federal trap without blinking an eye. They might say that blood is thicker than water. But those people do not understand that for 34 years, my family has treated my blood like it was cheap while treating Trey's like it was royal wine. To understand why I felt zero guilt as the FBI team moved into position outside the restaurant, you have to understand that I did not leave my family that night. They left me decades ago. The division started the day I was born. My mother Martha often told the story to her friends not with shame, but with a strange sort of amusement. She told them how she cried when the nurse handed me to her. Not tears of joy, but tears of disappointment. She had wanted a daughter who looked like a porcelain doll. Instead, she got me. I was dark-skinned from birth. I had coarse, thick hair. I was the undeniable evidence of our African roots that my mother tried so hard to bleach out of our family image with her straightening combs and her skin-lightening creams. Trey, on the other hand, was their golden miracle. He was born 2 years before me, with caramel skin and soft curly hair. He was the palatable version of blackness that my parents thought would open doors in high society. He was the child they showed off at church. I was the child they told to stay out of the sun so I would not get any darker. That dynamic never changed. It only got more expensive. I remember my sophomore year at Howard University. I was on the dean's list, studying accounting and criminal justice, but I was also starving. I was working 2 jobs, one at the library, stacking books until midnight, and another at the cafeteria serving food I could not afford to buy just to pay for my textbooks. I called home one night in tears. I had $40 in my bank account to last me 3 weeks. I was eating ramen noodles and skipping dinner every other night to save money for the bus fare to my internship. My father, David, answered the phone. I told him I was hungry. I asked him if he could send me $50 just so I could buy groceries. He gave me a lecture about responsibility. He told me that struggle builds character. He told me that God provides for those who hustle, and that I needed to pray more and beg less. He hung up on me. 2 days later, I saw a post on Facebook. They had thrown a surprise party for Trey's 21st birthday. In the photo, Trey was leaning against a brand new BMW convertible with a red bow on the hood. The caption read, "A king deserves a chariot. We are so proud of our son." I sat in my dorm room staring at that picture while my stomach grumbled. The car cost $40,000. They wouldn't send me 50 for food. I realized then that their resources were not finite. They were just finite for me. I was the investment that didn't matter. Trey was the asset they were betting everything on, even though he was flunking out of state college at the time. Then came Courtney. If I was the disappointment, Courtney was the replacement. When Trey brought her home 5 years ago, it was like the sun had finally come out in the Jenkins household. She was blonde. She was petite. She came from old money in Connecticut. She was everything my mother wished she could be, and everything she wished I was. My mother fawned over her in a way she never did with me. She touched Courtney's hair with reverence. She cooked Courtney's favorite meals, asking her about her dietary restrictions with genuine concern, while forgetting that I was allergic to shellfish for 3 years in a row. She literally pushed me out of family photos to make sure Courtney was standing next to Trey center frame. Courtney wasn't just happy to be accepted, she was territorial. She recognized immediately that I was the outlier, and she used it to her advantage. She saw me not as a sister, but as a competitor for the family resources. She knew that if I was out of the picture, the entire inheritance would go to Trey and by extension to her. I overheard her once whispering to my mother in the kitchen during Christmas. I was in the hallway holding a tray of dirty dishes that I was expected to wash because the help shouldn't sit with the guests. Courtney was sipping wine. She said, "Martha, are you sure it is wise to leave the lake house to both of them in the will? Sophia is so independent. She is so different from us. She might sell it to the wrong kind of people. Trey and I would keep it in the family. We would preserve the legacy." And my mother just nodded. She agreed. She agreed that her own daughter was a threat to the family image. She agreed that I should be written out. They stripped away my humanity layer by layer until all that was left was a resentment hard enough to cut glass. They made me invisible in my own home. If I spoke about my career, they changed the subject. If I achieved something, it was luck. If Trey failed, it was the world conspiring against him. If I bought a nice dress, they asked if it was on sale. If Courtney bought a designer bag, they praised her taste. So when I built the honeypot, I wasn't just catching criminals. I was balancing the scales. I was taking back every meal I missed in college. I was taking back every insult I swallowed at Christmas. I was taking back every time they looked at my skin and saw something less than. I was letting their own greed be the instrument of their destruction. I gave them the rope and they were eagerly tying the noose around their own necks. My mind snapped back to the present. The restaurant was still buzzing with the low hum of expensive conversations. The vintage champagne had arrived and the waiter was filling the flutes. The bubbles rose to the top, effervescent and lively, just like the mood of the 3 people sitting across from me. Trey stood up, glass in hand. His face was flushed with the intoxication of theft. He looked at me, his eyes dancing with malicious delight. He didn't see a federal agent. He didn't see a forensic auditor who had just flagged his IP address to the United States government. He just saw the dark-skinned little sister he had bullied his whole life. He saw the scapegoat. He saw the loser. He raised his glass high, the light catching the crystal. He wanted to twist the knife one last time. He wanted to make sure I knew my place at the bottom of the food chain. A toast, he announced loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. Everyone looked at him. My father beamed with pride. My mother clasped her hands together in adoration. Courtney smirked, her eyes fixed on me, waiting for my reaction. To family, Trey said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, and specifically to my little sister Sophia. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the air. Let us raise a glass to Sophia's stupidity, he said with a cruel laugh. Because without her naivety and her generous lack of spine, we wouldn't be rich tonight. To Sophia, the gift that keeps on giving even when she doesn't want to. Cheers! My father laughed. My mother giggled. Courtney clinked her glass against Trey's. Cheers to the fool, Courtney echoed. I watched them drink. I watched the expensive liquid slide down their throats. I watched them savor the taste of their victory. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the reflection in the front window. Blue lights. Silent, but blinding. The toast was over. 15 minutes. That is exactly how long it takes for the adrenaline of a crime to settle into the false security of success. For 15 minutes, my family lived in a fantasy world where they were millionaires, where the laws of mathematics and morality did not apply to them. They ordered another bottle of wine. They laughed about the vacations they were going to take. Trey was already looking up real estate listings in Miami on his phone, scrolling through condos that cost more than he had earned in his entire life. I sat there and let them enjoy it. I let them climb higher and higher up the mountain of their own hubris because I knew the fall would be that much more devastating. I focused on my dinner. The steak was perfectly cooked, medium rare, and I sliced it with surgical precision. It was the only thing at this table that wasn't bloody and raw. Courtney was the first one to snap out of the celebration. She was the brains of this operation, or at least she thought she was. She leaned over to Trey, tapping her manicured nail sharply against his phone screen. "Baby, stop looking at condos," she whispered, though in her excitement, her whisper was loud enough for me to hear. "We need to move the money. Leaving it in the LLC account overnight is risky. Banks run audits at midnight. We need to wire it to the offshore entity in the Caymans right now. Right. Once it hits the island, it is untouchable." Trey looked up a little glazed from the wine. "Relax, Court. We just got it. Can't we just enjoy the moment?" "Do it now, Trey," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "We stick to the plan. Wash it, then spend it." Fine, fine. You worry too much," Trey mumbled. He opened the banking app again. I watched his thumb hover over the screen. He navigated to the transfer tab. He punched in the account number for the shell company Courtney had set up weeks ago. He typed in the full amount. $1,500,000. He hit transfer. I took a slow bite of my steak, savoring the peppercorn sauce. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Trey frowned. He tapped the screen again. "That is weird," he said. "What is weird?" Courtney asked, sipping her drink. "It is buffering," Trey said. "The little wheel just keeps spinning. It is not going through." "It is probably just the reception in here," my father said dismissively. "This building has thick walls. Hold the phone up higher." Trey held the phone up, waving it around like he was trying to catch a signal. Then he stopped moving. His face, which had been flushed red with excitement, suddenly drained of all color. It turned a sickly shade of gray. "What?" Courtney asked, sensing the shift. "What happened? I don't know," Trey stammered. His voice trembled. "A red box just popped up." "What does it say?" Courtney demanded, snatching the phone from his hand. I watched her read it. I knew exactly what it said because I had helped write the code for that specific error message. It did not say connection error. It did not say insufficient funds. Courtney stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She read the words out loud, her voice shaking. Account frozen. Critical security alert. Code red. Contact Federal Department of Justice immediately. Reference case number. She stopped reading. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Code red. My father asked, confused. What is a code red? Is that a bank thing? Courtney looked up, and for the first time genuine fear was swimming in her eyes. No, she whispered. That is not a bank thing. That is a government thing. Give me that, my mother snapped. You two are doing it wrong. You probably typed the password incorrectly. Let me try. My mother grabbed the iPad, which was still on the table. She tried to log into her own personal account, the one she shared with my father, the one that held their retirement savings and the church building fund. She tapped frantically. It is not letting me in, she cried out, her voice rising an octave. It says user locked. It says, oh my God. It says asset forfeiture pending. Panic is a contagious disease, and it swept through the table instantly. Trey grabbed his phone back and tried to log into his personal checking account. Locked. Courtney grabbed her phone and tried to access her credit cards. Declined. Everything is down, Trey yelled, losing all composure. Checking my savings, even my crypto wallet, it is all frozen. I can't access anything. My father pulled out his wallet and slammed his platinum credit card on the table. He gestured wildly for the waiter. Check this, he barked at the terrified young man who had just approached to refill the water. Run a $1 charge, right now. The waiter looked confused but took the card. He walked to the portable terminal near the side station. We all watched him insert the card. We watched him wait. And then we watched him frown and look back at our table. He shook his head. I am sorry, sir, the waiter said, walking back. The card has been seized. The machine says to retain the card and call the authorities. Seized! My father bellowed, standing up. That is impossible. I am David Jenkins. I have been a member of this bank for 40 years. Courtney was hyperventilating. She was tapping furiously on her phone, trying every app, every account, every digital avenue she had. It is a glitch, she screamed, her voice cracking. It has to be a system-wide glitch. The whole banking system must be down. There is no way they could freeze everything this fast. We just moved the money 5 minutes ago. She looked at me. I was the only one not checking a phone. I was the only one not screaming. I was calmly cutting another piece of steak, dipping it in the sauce, and bringing it to my mouth. Why aren't you panicking? Courtney screeched at me. Your account was the one we used. If the system is down, you are frozen too. Check your phone. I chewed slowly, swallowing with a deliberate grace. I wiped the corner of my mouth with the linen napkin. I looked at her, then at Trey, then at my parents. They looked like rats on a sinking ship, scurrying around looking for a hole that wasn't there. I picked up my wine glass and swirled it gently. Why would I check my phone? I asked, my voice smooth and unbothered. My dinner is getting cold. Sophia, my mother screamed. Do something. Call the bank. You are an accountant. Fix this. I looked at her. Is something wrong? I asked, feigning innocence. Is the Wi-Fi in the restaurant weak? Maybe you should try switching to data. Sometimes the reception in the back near the kitchen is spotty. That is where you tried to seat me. Remember, maybe the signal is better back there. You little witch, Courtney spat. This isn't about Wi-Fi. The feds locked us out. How did they know? How could they possibly know? She stopped. Her eyes widened. She looked at me. Really looked at me. She saw the calm. She saw the lack of surprise. She saw the forensic accountant who tracked money for a living sitting across from her eating steak while their world burned. You, she whispered. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Before she could finish her thought, a sound began to bleed into the dining room. It started low, a distant wail from the street outside, but it grew louder with terrifying speed. It wasn't just one siren. It was a chorus. A symphony of emergency alarms layering over each other, getting closer and closer until the sound was bouncing off the brick walls of the building. Blue and red lights began to flash against the front windows of the restaurant, strobing through the elegant curtains, turning the warm candlelight into a chaotic disco of police enforcement. The heavy wooden doors of the restaurant flew open again. But this time, it wasn't a guest. The restaurant manager ran into the room. He was a composed man, usually impeccable in his suit. But now, his face was pale sweat beading on his forehead. He scanned the room frantically until his eyes landed on our table. He didn't walk. He ran toward us. "Mr. Jenkins," he gasped, reaching our table, his hands shaking. "You need to come with me. Now. The perimeter. They have surrounded the building. Who has—" my father demanded, though his voice had lost all its power. The manager swallowed hard, looking at the flashing lights outside. "Everybody, sir. The FBI, the IRS, and SWAT. They are asking for you. By name." The heavy double doors of Le Bernardin swung open with a force that rattled the nearby window panes. It was not the polite entrance of a maitre d' or a late reservation. It was an invasion. The first thing I noticed was the windbreakers. They were navy blue and starkly utilitarian, standing in violent contrast to the velvet curtains and silk tablecloths of the fine dining room. But it was the bold yellow lettering on the back of those jackets that sucked the air right out of the room. FBI. And right behind them, wearing slightly different insignia, but carrying the same terrifying weight, was the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The restaurant fell into a silence so absolute you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died in throats. The only sound was the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots hitting the hardwood floor. They did not look around. They did not hesitate. They moved with the precision of a wolf pack that had already singled out its prey. And that prey was sitting at table 4, right in the center of the room. My family was frozen in a tableau of confusion and dawning horror. Trey was still holding his phone, his thumb hovering over the frozen banking app. Courtney was clutching her designer purse to her chest, as if it could shield her from federal indictments. My mother looked like she was about to faint, her face blending in with the white tablecloth. The lead agent walked straight toward us. I recognized him immediately. It was Special Agent Miller, the man I had sat with in a sterile office 2 weeks ago planning this exact moment. He looked different in the field. He looked taller, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. He stopped 2 feet away from my father. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. "David Jenkins," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that demanded attention. "Trey Jenkins, Courtney Miller." My father stood up. It was an instinct born of decades in the pulpit. He was used to commanding rooms, used to being the authority figure that everyone respected. He smoothed his suit jacket, trying to summon the dignity of the patriarch. "I am David Jenkins," my father announced, projecting his voice so the onlookers would hear him. "And I demand to know the meaning of this intrusion. We are having a private family dinner. You are frightening the guests. Do you know who I am? I am a pillar of this community. I am a pastor." Agent Miller did not look impressed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I know exactly who you are," Mr. Jenkins Miller said calmly. "You are a suspect in an ongoing federal investigation into wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the RICO Act. This is a warrant for your arrest and the immediate seizure of all assets associated with you, your wife, and your son." "Arrest?" My father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is preposterous. We are law-abiding citizens. We have done nothing wrong. There must be a mistake. A computer glitch. I will have your badge for this." Courtney decided to join the fray, finding her voice through her panic. "My father is Judge Sterling in Connecticut," she screeched, standing up to point a shaking finger at Agent Miller. "You cannot arrest us. We are not criminals. We are victims here. Our accounts were hacked. The system locked us out. You should be helping us, not harassing us." Miller turned his cold gaze to Courtney. We didn't lock you out because of a hack, Ms. Miller. We locked you out because 15 minutes ago, you authorized a transfer of $1.5 million of marked federal currency into a shell company known to be used for laundering illicit funds. That is a lie, Trey shouted, jumping up and knocking his chair over. That was family money. My sister gave it to us. It was a gift. Miller looked at Trey with something approaching pity. A gift, Miller repeated flatly. We have digital logs of a forced entry into a protected account using a forged power of attorney document. That is not a gift, son. That is grand larceny. And since you used the internet to move the funds across state lines, it is a federal crime. My mother began to weep loudly, clutching my father's arm. David, tell them. Tell them we are good people. Tell them about the church. Tell them about the charity work. We are not thieves. My father turned on his charm, trying to salvage the situation. He put on his benevolent smile, the one he used when asking for tithes. Officer, listen to me. This is a simple family misunderstanding. My daughter Sophia, she can clear this up. She is right here. She will tell you that she authorized the transfer. She will tell you that we have her full permission. He turned to me, his eyes pleading, his face desperate. Sophia, tell them, my father urged. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you gave us the money. The entire restaurant turned to look at me. The agents turned to look at me. My family turned to look at me. I felt the weight of every gaze in the room. I looked at my father. I looked at the sweat dripping down his forehead. I looked at Trey, who was trembling like a leaf. I looked at Courtney, whose arrogance had finally shattered into a million pieces. I slowly placed my knife and fork down on my plate. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. I took a sip of water, clearing my throat. Agent Miller looked at me, waiting. Ma'am, Miller said formally, playing his part to perfection. Can you confirm if you authorize these individuals to access your trust fund and transfer these assets? My father nodded at me encouragingly. Go on, Sophia. Tell the truth. I looked my father dead in the eye. No, I said clearly, my voice steady and strong. I did not authorize it. The color drained from my father's face. What my mother whispered. Sophia, what are you saying? I turned to Agent Miller, ignoring my mother completely. I did not authorize the transfer, I repeated. In fact, I explicitly told them to stop. I warned them that if they pressed that button, they would be committing a crime. They ignored me. They used a forged document that my sister-in-law created to bypass the bank's security protocols. And they did it right in front of me while mocking me for being powerless. You lying little witch, Courtney screamed, lunging across the table toward me. Two agents moved faster than I could blink. They grabbed Courtney by the arms and slammed her back against the wall. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place echoed through the room. Get off me! She shrieked, kicking and thrashing. This is assault. I am a white woman. You cannot treat me like this. We just did, Miller said, signaling his team. Agents moved in on Trey and my father. They pulled Trey's arms behind his back. He started crying loudly, sobbing like a toddler. Mom, help me, he wailed. I don't want to go to jail. Mom, do something. My mother stood there, watching her golden child being cuffed, watching her husband being restrained. She looked at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. You did this, she hissed. You set us up. You are the devil, Sophia. You are the devil himself. I stood up, smoothing out my dress. I picked up my clutch and walked around the table until I was standing right next to Agent Miller. I am not the devil, Mother, I said calmly. I am just the witness. Agent Miller nodded at me. We have everything we need, Ms. Jenkins. The IP logs, the audio recording from your wire, and the digital footprint of the transfer. It is an open and shut case. He turned to the room, addressing the stunned diners. Folks, show is over. Please return to your meals. But nobody looked away. They watched as my father tried to maintain his dignity while being marched out. They watched as Trey sobbed. They watched as Courtney screamed threats about her father, the judge. As they were dragged toward the door, my father looked back at me one last time. Why, he asked, his voice broken. Why would you destroy your own family? I looked at him. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I felt unburdened. Because, Dad, I said soft enough that only he could hear. You broke it a long time ago. I just swept up the pieces. The doors closed behind them, leaving me standing alone in the center of the restaurant. The manager walked up to me looking terrified. "Ms. Jenkins," he stammered. I I don't know what to say. Is there anything we can get you?" I looked at the unfinished bottle of Dom Perignon on the table, the bottle my family had ordered to celebrate stealing from me. "Yes," I said, smiling. "I will have the check. And please pack the rest of that steak to go. I have a long night ahead of me." As the handcuffs clicked tight around my father's wrists, the sound rang out like a church bell signaling the end of service. The entire restaurant was suspended in a state of shock. My mother was weeping into a cloth napkin, her perfectly applied makeup streaking down her face in jagged lines of mascara. Trey was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he stared at the floor, unable to comprehend how his Porsche and his penthouse had dissolved into a federal indictment in the span of 30 seconds. I stood up slowly. I took my time smoothing the fabric of my dress, ensuring every crease was perfect. I picked up my glass of water and took a small, refreshing sip. Then I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of them. I was no longer the daughter sitting in the shadows at the kids' spot. I was the only person standing in the room. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad." My father looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. "Sophia, tell them. Tell them who you are. Tell them you are just a tax accountant. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." I shook my head, a small pitying smile playing on my lips. "That is the thing, Dad," I lied. The room went quiet. Even the agent seemed to pause to let me speak. "I do not do taxes for small businesses," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "I do not spend my days filing 1040 forms or worrying about deductibles. For the last 7 years, I have been the lead forensic auditor for the Mid-Atlantic Division of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." My mother gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. You work for the government. I work for the people who catch people like you," I corrected gently. "I specialize in complex wire fraud, international money laundering, and asset forfeiture. When I told you I got a promotion last month, the one you ignored because Trey was talking about his fantasy football league, I wasn't made a senior manager. I was made the director of the task force." I turned to Agent Miller, who gave me a subtle nod of respect. "You see," I continued, walking over to where Courtney was pressed against the wall. "You all made a very critical mistake. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was stupid. You assumed that because I didn't brag about money, I didn't understand it." I looked down at Courtney. She was trembling, but her eyes were still full of defiance. "Let me explain exactly what is going to happen to you, Courtney," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You see that money you transferred? The $1.5 million. That wasn't Grandma's trust fund. Grandma died with nothing because Dad spent it all on bad investments in the 90s. My father made a choking sound, but I ignored him. That account was a honeypot, Courtney. It was a dummy account created by the FBI and filled with marked federal currency. It is bait, and you swallowed it whole." Courtney shook her head frantically. No, that is entrapment. My father will have this thrown out." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "It is not entrapment if you break into the house to steal the cheese, Courtney. And because you used a computer to access that account, you committed wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code Section 1343. That carries a sentence of up to 20 years. I took a step closer, counting off the crimes on my fingers. Because you forged my signature on that power of attorney document, you committed aggravated identity theft. That is a mandatory minimum of 2 years consecutive to any other sentence. And because you, Trey, and Dad conspired together to move that money into an offshore shell company, you have triggered the RICO Act, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations." I leaned in so close I could smell the expensive perfume she had sprayed on, hoping to impress her investors. RICO is a special kind of hell, Courtney. It means the government doesn't just put you in jail. It means we take everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry, the retirement accounts, even that fake Birkin bag you are clutching so tightly. It all belongs to the United States government now. Courtney's face crumbled. The arrogance, the superiority, the veneer of the untouchable rich girl finally cracked. But I am a mother, she stammered, tears spilling over. I have a reputation. I went to Vassar. I am not a criminal. I looked her up and down, letting my gaze linger on her pale, tear-stained face. You thought you were smarter than me, didn't you? I asked. You thought because you are white and you went to a private school and you married the golden boy that you were untouchable. You thought you could walk all over the quiet black girl who sits in the corner. You thought I was just the help. I straightened up, looking down at her with pure disdain. Well, Courtney, that quiet black girl just turned you into a federal mule. You didn't just steal money, you laundered government property. You are not going to the country club. You are going to federal prison. And trust me, they do not care where you went to college in there. Something inside Courtney snapped. The reality of her future, the humiliation of being bested by the sister-in-law she had tormented for years, was too much for her fragile ego to handle. Her eyes went wide and wild. A guttural scream tore from her throat, a sound of pure animalistic rage. "You bitch!" she shrieked. "You ruined my life!" She lunged. It happened in slow motion. Courtney pushed off the wall, her hands clawed into talons aiming for my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the smile from my face. She wanted to silence the truth I had just spoken. But she never reached me. Before her fingers could even graze my skin, 2 agents tackled her. It was a violent, efficient movement. They slammed her into the hardwood floor face first. The impact shook the silverware on the tables. "Get off me!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the floorboards. "My father is a judge. You will all be fired." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood directly over her, looking down at the woman who had made my life miserable for 5 years. I looked at her cheek pressed against the dirty floor of the restaurant. I looked at Agent Miller. "Add assaulting a federal witness to the list," I said calmly. Miller smirked as he tightened the cuffs on Courtney's wrists. "With pleasure, Ms. Jenkins." I turned back to my parents. My mother was sobbing quietly, rocking back and forth. My father looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. They were watching their legacy being dragged away in handcuffs. They were watching the daughter they rejected standing tall amidst the wreckage. "I hope the $200,000 was worth it," I said to them. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, not looking back, as the agents began to read them their Miranda rights. The sound of Courtney screaming my name followed me out into the cool night air. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they had to say. I had work to do, and the night was just beginning. The illusion of the Jenkins family dynasty did not just crack that night, it shattered into a million jagged pieces, and the sound of that destruction was louder than the sirens wailing outside. I stood near the hostess stand, watching the final act of a tragedy that had been 30 years in the making. The most pathetic sight was not my father seeing his reputation turn to ash, or my mother realizing her social standing was over. It was Trey. My brother, the golden child, the prince who had been promised the kingdom since birth, was currently on his knees weeping. The confident entrepreneur who had been bragging about Porsches and penthouses 5 minutes ago had dissolved into a terrified toddler. His face was a mask of snot and tears. His expensive suit was bunched up around his shoulders where the agent held him. He was not acting like a man who had made a mistake. He was acting like a child who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar and was desperate to blame anyone but himself. "It wasn't my idea." Trey sobbed, his voice cracking as he looked up at Agent Miller. "Please, you have to believe me. I did not want to do it. It was her. It was Courtney. She made me do it." The room went deadly silent. Even the agents seemed disgusted by the display. I looked at Courtney, who was being held by two agents a few feet away. Her face, which had been filled with rage just moments before, went blank with shock. She stared at her husband, the man she had conspired with, the man she had mocked me with, and watched him throw her under the bus without a second of hesitation. She pressured me. Trey continued, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic stream. She told me we needed the money. She set up the shell company. She forged the documents. I just did what she said. I am a victim here. I didn't know it was illegal. She told me it was a loophole. Please do not take me to jail. Take her. She is the mastermind. Courtney let out a sound that was half laugh and half scream. The betrayal was so absolute it seemed to short-circuit her brain. She struggled against the agents, her eyes locking onto Trey with a hatred so intense it could have peeled paint. "You coward!" she screamed. "You spineless little worm! You begged me to fix your gambling debts. You were crying in our bedroom last night, terrified that your bookie was going to break your legs. I did this to save your miserable life." She turned to the agents, her voice shrill and desperate. "He is lying. He knew everything. He gave me Sophia's social security number. He is the one who wanted the Porsche. He is the one who wanted to show off for his daddy. And now he is crying like a baby because he got caught. I should have listened to my mother. She told me never to marry a man who needed his mommy to tie his shoes." "Shut up!" Trey yelled back, struggling against the cuffs. "You are just a gold digger. You ruined my life." I watched them tear each other apart. These were the people who had looked down on me my entire life. These were the people who called themselves a power couple. They were not powerful. They were parasites feeding off each other, and the moment the host body fought back, they turned on themselves. My mother, Martha, could not stand it anymore. She could handle her husband being arrested. She could handle the shame. But she could not handle seeing her precious Trey, her baby boy, being taken away. She broke free from the shock that had paralyzed her and rushed toward me. She didn't look at Trey. She didn't look at her husband. She came straight to me, grabbing my arm with frantic, desperate strength. "Sophia, stop this!" She pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Look at your brother. Look at him. He is terrified. He is not a criminal. He is just a boy. He made a mistake, a silly mistake." She shook my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Tell them to let him go, Sophia. You have the power. You work for them. Tell them you withdraw the complaint. Tell them you do not want to press charges. We will pay the money back. I will sell my jewelry. I will sell the house. Just tell them to stop. Please, Sophia. He is your brother. You cannot let him go to prison. He will not survive in there." I looked down at my mother. For the first time I saw her not as the towering matriarch who controlled my life, but as a delusional old woman clinging to a fantasy. She truly believed that the rules of the world did not apply to her son. She believed that because she loved him, the law should not touch him. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional distance between us. "I cannot stop this, Mother," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Yes, you can," she cried. "You are the director. You said so yourself. Just make a call. Tell them it was a family dispute. Tell them it was a prank." I sighed, looking at Agent Miller, who was watching the exchange with a stoic expression. "Mother, listen to me very carefully," I said, speaking slowly so she would understand. "This is not a civil dispute. This is not me suing Trey for stealing my allowance. This is a federal criminal case. The moment they pressed that button, they stole from the United States Treasury. I am not the plaintiff. I am just the witness. The plaintiff is the United States of America." My mother stared at me, her mouth open. "But it is your money," she whispered. "No," I said. "It was bait. And even if it was my money, I could not drop the charges now. The train has left the station. The FBI does not do take-backs. Trey committed a felony. He confessed to it digitally. And now he is confessing to it verbally in front of 20 witnesses." I looked over at Trey, who was still sobbing and blaming Courtney. "He is going to prison, Mother. and there is nothing you or I or God can do to stop it. My mother let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She finally understood. The golden child had fallen, and he was never getting up again. Agent Miller signaled to his team. "Let us move out," he commanded. "Secure the suspects in the vehicles." The agents began to march them toward the door. Trey was practically being carried, his legs dragging on the floor as he begged for his mother. Courtney was walking with her head down, muttering curses under her breath. My father David was the last to go. He tried to regain some of his dignity. He straightened his back and lifted his chin, trying to look like the martyr. He thought he could walk out of there with his head held high. He thought he could spin this later. He thought he could tell his congregation that he was being persecuted by the deep state, or that it was a misunderstanding. He walked toward the door, scanning the room, hoping to see someone sympathetic. But he only saw disgust. As they reached the double doors, I checked my phone. I sent a single text message to the contact labeled "Freelance Videographer." The message read, "Showtime." My father pushed through the doors, expecting the cool night air. Instead, he was blinded. A wall of flashing white lights erupted from the sidewalk. It wasn't just the police lights, it was camera flashes, video lights, the harsh glare of live streaming rigs. I had hired 3 local stringers freelance camera crews who chased police scanners to be waiting outside. I told them that a prominent local pastor and his family were being arrested in a major federal bust. I knew that in the age of social media, shame is the ultimate weapon. I walked out behind them, standing in the shadows of the doorway. I watched as my father recoiled from the lights. I heard the questions being shouted by the reporters who had gathered. "Pastor Jenkins, is it true you stole from your own daughter? Trey, is it true you laundered money for a cartel? Mrs. Miller, how much of the money was for personal use?" I watched as Trey saw the cameras. He tried to hide his face, but it was too late. The image of him crying, snot running down his nose, handcuffed and pathetic, was being beamed live to thousands of people. The comments on the live streams were already scrolling by faster than the eye could read. "Karma is real. Look at that car." "I go to his church." I knew he was shady. My father looked around wildly, searching for an escape. He looked directly at the camera lens, and for a split second he saw his entire life's work, his reputation, his legacy incinerating in real time. He looked back at the door. He saw me standing there. I wasn't smiling anymore. I was just watching. I was the ghost at his funeral. The agents pushed him into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the street. I pulled out my phone and opened the live stream app. I saw the view count climbing. 5,000, 10,000. The video was going viral. The title of the stream was perfect. "Wealthy pastor and family arrested at luxury dinner for robbing daughter." I watched the car drive away, the red taillights disappearing into the traffic of DC. I took a deep breath of the night air. It smelled like exhaust and rain and freedom. My phone buzzed again. It was Agent Miller. "We will need you at the station for a formal statement tomorrow morning. Go home, Sophia. You did good." I put the phone in my purse. I turned to the valet who was holding the keys to my modest sedan, looking at me with wide eyes. "Keep it close," I told him. "I'm going to have dessert first." I walked back into the restaurant. The manager had already cleared our table. He had set a fresh place setting at a small, quiet booth in the corner, away from the prying eyes. He had placed a fresh glass of wine and the dessert menu on the table. I sat down. I ordered the chocolate soufflé. And as I waited for it to arrive, I realized that for the first time in 34 years, I didn't have to worry about what my family thought. I didn't have to worry about protecting them or pleasing them or paying for them. They were gone, and I was still here. Courtney didn't just sing, she composed an entire opera of betrayal. Based on her testimony, the FBI raided my parents' house 3 hours later. They went straight to the heavy mahogany desk in my father's study and pulled back the Persian rug. There, just as Courtney had promised, was the floor safe. My father had refused to give up the combination, claiming he had forgotten it in his old age, but a federal drill team made short work of the steel door. Inside, they found the physical rot that lay at the heart of the Jenkins dynasty. It wasn't just cash. It was a ledger. A handwritten, leather-bound book that detailed 20 years of financial hypocrisy. I sat in the conference room at the field office as Agent Daniels walked me through the findings. I thought I was unshockable. I thought I knew exactly how greedy and selfish my family was. But I was wrong. I had estimated their corruption in the shallow end, when in reality they were swimming in the Mariana Trench. The church building fund, the one my mother had guilted poor widows into donating to for a decade, had never been used to buy a single brick. Instead, the ledger showed monthly payments of $5,000 to a woman named Charmaine in Baltimore. Charmaine, it turned out, was my father's mistress of 20 years. He had bought her a condo. He had paid for her son's college tuition. I stared at the tuition payments recorded in the ledger. 2010, 2011, 2012. The years I was working 2 jobs and starving in the university cafeteria, my father was using stolen church money to put his mistress's son through a private university. The rage that rose in my chest was cold and suffocating. But that wasn't all. There were other withdrawals labeled simply entertainment. Thousands of dollars a month, traced back to underground poker rooms and high-stakes betting parlors in Atlantic City. My father, the pious Reverend David Jenkins, who preached fire and brimstone sermons about the evils of vice, had gambled away nearly $3 million of his congregation's money over 2 decades. And then came the most devastating revelation of all. Agent Daniels slid a stack of emails across the table. They were printed from my mother's secret email account. "Your mother knew," Daniels said softly. "She knew everything." I picked up the papers. They were dated 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Emails from my mother to my father confronting him about Charmaine, confronting him about the gambling debts. But she didn't threaten to leave him. She didn't threaten to expose him. She negotiated. In exchange for her silence, she demanded a larger allowance. She demanded the Mercedes. She demanded that Trey be taken care of first. She wrote explicitly, "We must maintain the image of the perfect family, David. If you go down, I go down. Fix this or I will ruin you." My mother wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. She had traded her dignity and her daughter's well-being for a front-row seat in the church and a closet full of designer coats. She accepted the mistress. She accepted the theft. She accepted everything as long as she could keep pretending to be the queen of her little kingdom. I needed to see her. Agent Daniels advised against it, but I insisted. I needed to look her in the eye one last time. The federal detention center was a stark contrast to the luxury of Le Bernardin. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. I waited in the visitation room on a metal stool bolted to the floor. When the door opened and the guard led Martha Jenkins in, I almost didn't recognize her. Without her wig, without her makeup, without the expensive jewelry that acted as her armor, she looked small and gray. She looked like a ghost. She sat down on the other side of the plexiglass partition. She picked up the phone receiver, her hand shaking slightly. I picked up mine. "Hello, Mother." She didn't say hello. Her eyes were hard, flinty little stones filled with a venom that shocked me. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. Her voice was tinny through the phone receiver. "Are you satisfied, Sophia? You have destroyed everything. Your father is in the infirmary with chest pains. Trey is on suicide watch, and I am sitting in a cage wearing rags. Is this what you wanted?" I looked at her calmly. "I didn't steal the money, Mother. I didn't keep a mistress in Baltimore for 20 years. I didn't gamble away the church roof fund. You did that. All I did was turn on the lights." She slammed her hand against the glass. "Don't you dare judge your father," she spat. "He is a man. Men have needs. He provided for us. He kept this family together." And I held my head high. I bore my cross in silence to protect you children, to protect our name, and you ungrateful, spiteful little girl. You threw it all away because of what? Jealousy. Jealousy, I asked quietly. Yes, jealousy, she screamed. You were always jealous of Trey. You were jealous that he was special. You were jealous that he needed us and you didn't. You hated that we loved him more. Admit it, Sophia. You did this to punish us for loving your brother. I sat there listening to her delusion. She was rewriting history in real time, trying to make herself the martyr. I saw the ledger. Mother, I said, cutting through her rant. I saw the tuition payments for Charmaine's son. You let me starve in college. You let me work until my fingers bled while Dad paid for another woman's child to live in luxury. And you knew. You negotiated a raise in your allowance to keep your mouth shut. That is not love, Mother. That is prostitution. Her face twisted in ugly rage. I did what I had to do to survive, she snarled. I kept the family intact. I made sure we were respected. We were royalty in that church. And now we are a laughingstock. Do you know what they are saying on the news? Do you know what they are calling me? A fraud. A thief. And it is all your fault. If you had just given us the money, none of this would have happened. We could have paid off the debts. We could have kept the secret. But no. You had to be selfish. She leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging up the plastic. You are not my daughter, she whispered venomously. My daughter would never betray her own blood. You are a cancer, Sophia. You have rotted this family from the inside out. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked for a shred of maternal instinct, a glimmer of regret, a hint of love. There was nothing. Just a hollow shell of vanity and greed desperately trying to protect an image that no longer existed. I slowly hung up the phone. She kept talking, shouting, mouthing words behind the glass, but I couldn't hear her anymore. I stood up. She frantically tapped on the glass, screaming at me to come back, screaming that she wasn't done with me. I picked up the receiver one last time. You are wrong about one thing, Mother, I said, my voice cool and final. I didn't rot this family. This family has been rotting for 20 years. It was dead long before I walked into that restaurant. It was a corpse dressed up in Sunday best. I looked at her trembling gray figure. I didn't destroy the house, Mother. I am just the janitor who finally came to take out the trash. I placed the receiver back on the hook. I turned my back on her screaming face and walked toward the heavy steel door. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward my future, and I didn't look back. 6 months is a lifetime when you are waiting for a gavel to fall. For me, those months were spent in sterile offices preparing binders of evidence and reviewing financial audits. But for the Jenkins family, time was a slow-acting poison. The trial of the United States versus David Jenkins, Martha Jenkins, Trey Jenkins, and Courtney Miller became the scandal of the decade in Washington, D.C. The fall of the prominent pastor and his socialite family was covered by every major news outlet. By the time we walked into the federal courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning, the court of public opinion had already returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B was suffocating. I sat in the witness box watching the people who raised me huddle with their public defenders. They looked like shadows of their former selves. My father David had lost 30 pounds. The arrogant boom was gone from his voice, replaced by a nervous tremor. He had been stripped of his title. The church board had voted unanimously to remove him the day after the arrest. The congregation he had ruled over for 40 years had turned on him with the fury of the betrayed. There were no supporters in the gallery today, no prayer circles, just angry former parishioners who had lost their building fund to his gambling addiction. Trey and Courtney sat at opposite ends of the defense table. They refused to look at each other. The love story of the power couple had ended the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. Now they were just two drowning people trying to push the other head underwater to catch a breath. Courtney looked haggard, Her roots had grown out, leaving a stark line of dark brown against the bleached blonde. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a cheap gray suit provided by her lawyer. She looked small and angry. Trey just looked broken. He stared at the table, his leg bouncing nervously, a rhythm of pure terror. The prosecution called me as the final witness. I walked to the stand, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I swore on the Bible, the same Bible my father used to thump, while preaching lies to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the defense table. My mother Martha was sitting behind my father in the first row of the gallery. She was not on trial today, as her charges had been severed for a later date, but her eyes burned into me. She mouthed the word traitor. I didn't blink. The defense attorney for Courtney was a sharp, aggressive man named Mr. Klein. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, trying to look intimidating. He walked toward me with a sneer. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let us be honest with the jury. You hate your family, don't you? This entire operation, this honeypot as you call it, was born out of jealousy. You were the black sheep, the outcast. You wanted to punish them for being happy. Isn't that right?" I looked at him calmly. I had prepped for this. I knew they would attack my character because they couldn't attack the facts. "I do not hate my family," I replied, my voice cool and professional. "But my feelings are irrelevant, Mr. Klein. Mathematics does not have feelings. The numbers in the ledger do not care about my childhood." Klein slammed his hand on the railing. "But you set them up. You lured them in. You placed a temptation in front of them that you knew they couldn't resist. You preyed on their financial desperation." I leaned forward slightly, speaking directly to the jury. "I placed money in a bank account under my own name," I said. "That is not a trap. That is a savings account. A trap implies I forced them to enter. I didn't force Courtney Miller to forge a power of attorney document. I didn't force her to steal my social security number. I didn't force her to log into a computer and transfer funds that did not belong to her. She made a series of conscious criminal choices. I simply provided the means to record them." Klein looked flustered. He tried a different angle. "But Trey Jenkins is your brother. He testified that he was coerced, that he didn't know the nature of the transaction." I pulled a document from the folder in front of me. "I have here the IP logs from the transaction," I said, holding it up. "It shows that the device used to access the account was registered to Trey Jenkins. It also shows that 2 minutes after the initial theft, there was an attempt to move the funds to an offshore shell company. That requires a specific authorization code, a code that was sent to Trey's phone." He opened the text. He entered the code. "That is not coercion, Mr. Klein. That is participation." The jury scribbled notes. I saw the foreman nod his head. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio recordings of Courtney planning the theft, the forensic trail of the church money flowing into my father's mistress's account, the emails from my mother condoning the fraud. It was a mountain of corruption, and I was the guide at the summit pointing out every jagged rock. When I stepped down from the stand, Courtney glared at me. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right there in the courtroom. She whispered something to her lawyer, who shook his head vigorously. She wanted to testify. She wanted to scream. She wanted to use her white woman tears one last time. But her lawyer knew it was over. He knew that putting her on the stand against me would be a massacre. The closing arguments were brief. The prosecutor painted a picture of a greedy, entitled family who believed they were above the law. The defense tried to paint a picture of a misunderstood clan who had made a clerical error. It was laughable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the room went deathly silent. My father gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Trey closed his eyes, tears leaking out. Courtney stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched tight. "We find the defendant, David Jenkins, guilty on all counts of wire fraud and embezzlement." We find the defendant Trey Jenkins guilty on all counts of conspiracy and wire fraud. We find the defendant Courtney Miller guilty on all counts of aggravated identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy under the RICO Act. My mother let out a sharp cry from the gallery, but was quickly silenced by a bailiff. Then came the sentencing. The judge was a stern woman, with no patience for white-collar criminals who hid behind religion and status. She looked over her glasses at the three people standing before her. David Jenkins, she said, her voice echoing in the large room. You used the word of God to steal from the poor. You betrayed the trust of your community. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison. My father collapsed into his chair, his legs giving out. Trey Jenkins, the judge continued. You are a follower but a willing one. You chose greed over loyalty. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison. Trey started sobbing loudly, putting his head on the table. And finally, Courtney Miller. Courtney stood up, trembling. She looked small. She looked terrified. You were the architect, the judge said, her voice hardening. You used your knowledge of the banking system to commit a crime. You forged documents, you stole an identity, and you showed absolutely no remorse throughout this entire process. You blamed your husband, you blamed your victim, you blamed everyone but yourself. The judge paused, flipping a page in the file. Under the sentencing guidelines and due to the enhancement from the RICO charges, I am sentencing you to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years. The number hung in the air like a physical blow. The entire courtroom let out a collective gasp. Courtney's knees buckled. She didn't scream this time. She didn't fight. She simply dropped to the floor in a dead faint. Her lawyer scrambled to catch her. I sat in the witness box watching the chaos. 18 years. She would be 52 when she got out. Her youth, her beauty, her social status, everything she valued was gone. I looked at my watch. It was time for lunch. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courtroom. The sound of Trey's wailing and the medics attending to Courtney faded behind me. I walked out into the cold, bright winter sun. The air tasted clean. It tasted like justice. But the story wasn't quite over yet. There was one loose end left to tie up. One final goodbye to the life I used to know. The final gavel banged against the wood, echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. After months of legal maneuvering, plea deals, and tearful allocutions, the ledger was finally balanced. The numbers were etched into the federal record, and for the first time in the history of the Jenkins family, the math was honest. Trey received 10 years in a federal penitentiary. The judge showed him a small amount of leniency because of his emotional instability, but she made it clear that his greed was a danger to society. As the bailiffs clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists for the last time, he looked back at the gallery, searching for a mother who could no longer save him. He looked small. He looked like a boy who had finally realized that the world does not grade on a curve. 10 years of his prime erased because he felt entitled to money he didn't earn. Courtney fared worse. Despite her attempts to paint herself as a victim, the forensic evidence was undeniable. She was the technician. She was the one who knew how to bypass the firewalls. She was the one who forged the digital signatures. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. It was a sentence designed to send a message to every white-collar criminal who thinks a degree and a pedigree is a shield against justice. She didn't scream this time. She didn't faint. She just stared at the wall, her eyes dead and hollow, as the reality of missing her child's entire childhood settled into her bones. My parents, David and Martha, escaped prison, but they received a sentence that for them was a fate worse than death. Due to their advanced age and failing health, the judge granted them 5 years of strict probation. But the government was not done with them. Under the asset forfeiture laws, the Department of Justice seized everything. The house on the hill with the manicured lawn, the luxury cars, the investment accounts, even the contents of the floor safe. They were stripped naked. They were forced to move into a one-bedroom subsidized apartment on the other side of town. A neighborhood they used to look down on from their ivory tower. They lost their church, they lost their friends, They lost their status. They were no longer the Reverend and the First Lady. They were just two old, bitter people living in squalor, subsisting on government checks and the charity of strangers who didn't know their crimes. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, forced to live with each other, and the knowledge that they had thrown away their only loyal child for a son who was now an inmate. I walked out of the courthouse that day, and the air felt different. It was lighter. The crushing weight of expectation, the heavy blanket of the black tax, the constant demand to fix problems I didn't create, it was all gone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet oxygen of freedom. But I didn't walk out empty-handed. 2 weeks later, I sat in the office of the director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He slid a thick envelope across the mahogany desk. Inside was a check, a whistleblower reward. Under federal law, individuals who provide original information leading to the recovery of stolen government assets are entitled to a percentage of the seizure. Because my family had attempted to steal marked federal bait money, and because my testimony exposed a 20-year embezzlement scheme involving tax-exempt church funds, the recovery was massive. The check was for $350,000. It was ironic. They had tried to steal $1.5 million from me. In the end, they lost everything, and I legally earned a fortune for stopping them. I looked at the check, and I didn't see luxury cars or designer bags. I saw security. I saw a future that belonged only to me. I was also given a new title, Deputy Director of the Cybercrimes Division. I was no longer the quiet accountant in the background. I was the face of the department, a woman who had proven her integrity under the most extreme pressure imaginable. I walked out of the federal building and down the marble steps. At the bottom, waiting by a sleek black sedan, was Marcus. Marcus had been my rock through the entire ordeal. He was the high-powered attorney who had helped me navigate the legal minefield when I first went to the FBI. But he was more than that. He was the man who held me when I cried after visiting my mother. He was the man who reminded me that I wasn't betraying my family, I was saving myself. He was tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany, and a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He didn't care about my family's drama. He didn't care about their money or their status. He saw me. He saw Sophia. He opened the car door for me, his eyes warm and proud. "It is finally over, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded, sliding into the leather seat. "It is over." He got in the driver's side and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "So where to, Ms. Deputy Director?" "Celebration dinner, champagne, Paris." I smiled, squeezing his hand back. "Take the long way home, Marcus. I need to make one last stop." He knew exactly where I wanted to go. We drove in comfortable silence, winding our way through the city, leaving the noise of downtown behind. We drove toward the affluent suburbs, toward the zip code that used to define my existence. We turned onto the tree-lined street where I had grown up, the street where I had learned that I wasn't enough, the street where I had watched my brother get everything while I fought for scraps. Marcus slowed the car down as we approached the house. It stood there looming against the twilight sky. But it didn't look like the fortress of power it used to be. The grass was overgrown, the windows were dark, and planted firmly in the center of the lawn, right where my mother used to host her garden parties, was a sign. "Foreclosure. Bank owned. Do not trespass." The government had seized it and sold it to the bank to pay off the restitution. It was just a building now, a shell of brick and mortar emptied of the toxicity that had filled it for decades. I looked at the window of my old bedroom, the small room where I used to hide and study, the room where I dreamed of escaping. I realized with a start that I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt absolutely nothing. The ghost that had haunted me for 34 years had finally been exorcised. The power they held over me was gone. My worth was no longer tied to their approval. My identity was no longer tied to their rejection. I looked at Marcus. He was watching me carefully, ready to drive away the second I gave the signal. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked back at the house one last time. I saw the empty driveway where Trey's Porsche used to sit. I saw the dark front door where Courtney had barred my entry so many times. I saw the ghost of my father standing on the porch preaching lies. I turned to Marcus and smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I am better than okay, I said. I am free. I looked down at the engagement ring Marcus had placed on my finger the night before the sentencing. It was simple, elegant, and real. Just like the love we shared. Just like the family I was about to build with him. A family based on truth, on respect, on unconditional love. Drive, I said. Marcus put the car in gear. As we pulled away, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of darkness swallowed by the light of the setting sun. I rolled down the window, letting the wind catch my hair. I turned up the radio. The song playing was upbeat, full of life and rhythm. We drove west toward the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. We were driving toward my new house. My house. Bought with my money. Filled with my peace. The payoff wasn't the promotion. It wasn't the $350,000. It wasn't even seeing them get justice. The payoff was this moment. The moment I realized that I had survived. The moment I realized that being the black sheep didn't mean I was bad. It just meant I was the only one who refused to follow the herd off the cliff. My name is Sophia Jenkins. I am 34 years old. I am a survivor. And my life is just beginning. It has been exactly 1 year since I stood on the sidewalk outside Le Bernardin and watched the flashing lights of the police cruisers fade into the Washington night. 12 months since I surgically removed the tumor that was my biological family. In the medical world, when you remove a tumor, there is often a period of phantom pain. The body remembers the weight of what used to be there, even if that weight was killing you. For the first few weeks after the trial, I felt that phantom pain. I would wake up on Sunday mornings and reach for my phone expecting a guilt-tripping text from my mother about missing church. I would see a new sports car on the highway and instinctively worry that Trey had found a new bookie. I would check my bank accounts 3 times a day, terrified that the numbers had vanished. But slowly the phantom pain faded. It was replaced by something I had never experienced before. Silence. Not the lonely silence of isolation, but the peaceful silence of safety. The silence of knowing that when my phone rings, it is because someone wants to talk to me, not take from me. The silence of knowing that my achievements are mine, to celebrate, not resources to be harvested. People often quote the saying, "blood is thicker than water," to justify staying in abusive family dynamics. But they forget the full original verse. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the bonds we choose to forge, the promises we make to people who actually respect us, are stronger than the random biology of birth. My parents gave me DNA. They gave me skin color and bone structure. But they never gave me a family. I am sitting tonight in a booth at the Obsidian, a jazz club in downtown DC. The lighting is low and warm, casting a golden glow over the table. The music is a live saxophone quartet playing something smooth and intricate. Across from me sits Marcus, my husband, now his gold wedding band catching the light as he laughs at a joke. Next to him is Elena, my mentor at the agency, the woman who taught me how to track shell companies and who told me I was brilliant when my own father told me I was useless. And next to me is Jasmine, my best friend from college, the one who used to share her meal plan with me when I was starving. This is my covenant. This is my chosen family. We have just finished a feast. Lobster bisque, Wagyu beef, truffle fries, and 3 bottles of the kind of wine my father used to order but could never afford. We are celebrating my first anniversary as deputy director, but mostly we are just celebrating being together. There is no tension here. No one is jockeying for position. No one is making snide comments about my hair or my job. Then, the moment comes. The moment that used to paralyze me with anxiety. The waiter approaches the table with the black leather folder containing the bill. For 34 years, the arrival of a check was a signal for abuse. It was the moment I would be coerced, shamed, and drained. My heart rate spikes for a split second, a reflex ingrained by decades of trauma. But before the waiter can even set the folder down, Marcus's hand shoots out and intercepts it mid-air. "Nice try," he says, grinning at me. "But you are not touching this." I reach for it playfully. "Marcus, give it to me. It is my celebration dinner. I want to treat you guys." Elena leans across the table and smacks my hand away gently. "If you try to pay for this dinner, Sophia, I will write you up for insubordination on Monday. You are the guest of honor. You sit there and look pretty." Jasmine chimes in, pulling out her own platinum card. "Actually, I think I am getting this one. Marcus paid for the trip to Cabo last month. Elena got the engagement party. It is my turn. And don't you dare argue with me, Sophia, or I will tell everyone about your freshman year haircut." We all laugh. It is a warm, genuine sound that bubbles up from the chest. We spend the next 5 minutes arguing not about who has to pay, but about who gets the privilege of paying. We are fighting to be generous. We are fighting to care for each other. I sit back against the velvet banquette and watch them. I watch these beautiful, successful people fighting to cover $1,000 bill for me. And I realize that I am not just rich in money. I am rich in love. I am rich in respect. This is what family is supposed to look like. It is not an obligation. It is not a tax you pay for existing. It is a circle of mutual support where everyone brings something to the table and no one leaves hungry. I look at Marcus as he finally wins the battle, handing his card to the waiter with a triumphant wink. He looks at me, and I see total acceptance in his eyes. He knows about the trial. He knows about the prison sentences. He knows that my brother is currently sitting in a cell in West Virginia, and my parents are living in a government-subsidized apartment. He knows all the ugly, broken parts of my history, and he doesn't care. He loves me, not what I can do for him. I want to speak to you directly now. To the person watching this video who is sitting in their car, dreading walking into their parents' house. To the person who is staring at a text message from a sibling asking for money again. To the person who feels like they are drowning in guilt because they want to say no. I know how hard it is. I know that the world tells you to honor your father and mother. I know that your community might tell you that you owe your family your success. I know that the fear of being alone is terrifying. But let me tell you something I learned in that interrogation room. You cannot save people who are committed to drowning. You can only drown with them. And you are not a life raft. You are a human being. DNA is just a biological blueprint. It determines your eye color, not your destiny. It does not give anyone a license to abuse you. It does not give anyone a permanent tap into your bank account. And it certainly does not mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. My mother told me I was rotting the family. She was wrong. I was the only thing holding it together. And when I stepped away, the rot caused it to collapse under its own weight. That was not my fault. And it is not your fault if you have to walk away to save your sanity. There is a family out there waiting for you. A family that will celebrate your promotions, not your paychecks. A family that will defend you, not exploit you. A family that will fight to pay the bill. You just have to be brave enough to let go of the hand that is hurting you so you can reach out and find them. We walk out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air. The city lights are twinkling around us. Marcus wraps his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Ready to go home?" he asks. Home. That word used to mean a fortress of expectations and a prison of judgment. Now it means a quiet house with a garden I planted myself. It means a dog that greets me at the door. It means peace. Yes, I say. Let's go home. As we walk toward the car, I think about the ace. The ace up my sleeve. Throughout this entire ordeal, people asked me how I stayed so calm. How I sat at that table and ate my steak while my world exploded. They asked me how I knew I would win. The answer is simple. I never showed my hand. My family thought they knew everything about me. They thought I was simple. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the worker bee. They didn't know I was the queen because I never felt the need to tell them. That is the final lesson I want to leave you with. In a world that demands you share everything on social media, in a world that tells you to be an open book, keep something for yourself. Keep your finances private. Keep your dreams protected. Keep your true power hidden until it is absolutely necessary to use it. Do not let anyone know the full extent of your resources. Do not let anyone know the full depth of your strength. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you are the sheep, because when the wolf comes, and the wolf will come, you will be ready. I get into the car and watch the city pass by. I think of Courtney sitting in her cell thinking about the 15 years she has left. I think of Trey realizing that his golden status means nothing in prison. I think of my parents sitting in their small apartment, blaming me for their downfall. I don't wish them harm. I don't wish them suffering. I just don't think about them at all. I have erased them from my future. I turn to the camera one last time. My name is Sophia Jenkins. I am a forensic auditor. I am a wife. I am a survivor. And I am the proof that you can lose everyone you were born with and still end up with everything you deserve. Never let them see you coming. Never let them see you sweat. And always, always keep the ace. I lean back and close my eyes, listening to the hum of the engine and the beat of my own free heart. The game is over, and I won. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to break free from the people who were supposed to love you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs permission to walk away. Let me know in the comments how you found your chosen family. This is Sophia signing off. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember the best revenge is not destroying them. It is living a life so beautiful that they become irrelevant. Good night. This story teaches us that biology is not a binding contract. Just because someone shares your blood does not mean they are entitled to your peace, your labor, or your assets. We often tolerate abuse from family that we would never accept from strangers, trapping ourselves in cycles of guilt. But as Sophia showed, setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is self-preservation. You have the right to sever ties with toxicity, no matter who it comes from. Real family is built on respect, not manipulation. Never set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. Your dignity is non-negotiable. If you have ever had to choose your own mental health over a toxic family member, hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors.